Basics Cal OER, we are pleased to have you here. Our theme this year is exploring the open frontier, AI and emerging technologies in OER. I wanted to start off by recognizing our planning committee. Everyone's listed here. I'm in there. Michelle Pilati. I'm the project director for the Academic Senate for California Community Colleges Open Educational Resources Initiative. And you will see all of us in different places throughout the next couple of days. We also want to say a special thank you to our sponsors that enable us to hold this event as well as provide captioning, which actually is supported much by you. Your registration fee and the sponsors enable Cal OER to offer live captioning. And so we're pleased to provide live captioning for this event through our partnership with AI Media. All sessionists will have a live captionist available, and users may simply enable closed captioning by toggling on captions within the platform. We hope you share what you're learning. We've got hashtags that you can use, and so we hope to see you there talking about what you are getting out of this event. Some Zoom basics that you probably already know for the most part. Be sure to mute yourself if you are not muted. We really encourage you to use the chat. If there's time for Q&A, you can raise your hand and unmute when called upon, or you can ask your questions within the chat. All of the sessions will be recorded and will be available in the Zoom Events platform for 6 months after the event, and you will be notified when those recordings are available. The keynotes and our system updates will be available on the Cal OER YouTube channel that you can find at tinyurl.com/Cal OER archive. It is my pleasure to welcome our first keynote speaker. And I don't feel like she needs a lot of introduction, but I realize I probably should do a proper introduction. So Anna Mills is someone who has been known to the OERI for quite some time. She was one of our grant recipients during our first round of funding, and then during our second and during our third, and was also our first discipline lead for English, her discipline. And so she has been well known to us as an OER author. And then when the AI started emerging as part of our lives, Anna quickly became a leader there and someone who we turn to for all things AI. So I decided that I should use AI to help me come up with an introduction for her. And ChatGPT pointed out to me very quickly that Anna Mills is not just one person, that there's lots of people with that name, but ChatGPT has gotten smarter, and ChatGPT knew right away which Anna Mills I was looking for, and gave me all kinds of information about her. And then I went back and said, just give me some of the praise for Anna Mills so I can just focus on those highlights around what she's done. So Anna Mills is widely recognized as a thoughtful, forward-looking leader in open education and writing pedagogy, particularly at the intersection of OER and artificial intelligence. She is a champion of access and student success. She's an innovator in AI and writing pedagogy. She's described as a leader in the integration of artificial intelligence in education. She focuses on a practical, human-centered approach to AI, and her work really emphasizes balancing opportunity and risk, operating concrete strategies for using AI to enhance learning while maintaining academic integrity and critical thinking, which I think is one of the things that we're all really struggling with these days. I like the final little in short. Anna Mills is often praised not just for her expertise, but for her ability to translate complex challenges like AI and writing into practical, ethical, and student-centered teaching approaches, all while advancing the broader mission of open education. I thought that really, really captured Anna. And with that, I will stop sharing and let Anna take the reins.
Oh, thank you so much. This is really an incredible honor because I feel like I sort of grew up through the OER, this OER initiative and LibreText. Um, and I came out of my focus on my one institution and into a broader perspective, really just encouraged by these organizations. Um, so it's pretty incredible for me to get to do this keynote. Um, So, I wanted to focus on AI and open strength as human relationship. And there's some tension there, and a lot of excitement and opportunity. And I tend to go for the tension. So I hope you'll come along with me into both the excitement and the uneasiness and the big questions that are unresolved in many ways. So if you people have already been sharing in the chat, it's really nice to see like the whole range of where people are coming from and your colleges. If you want to share your role in the chat, that would be lovely, and maybe a favorite drink. Um, that's always kind of fun for me because I'm obsessed with tea. Um, so yeah, feel free to introduce a little more in the chat if you want. And thank you. Yeah, Cerise Myers, milk chai, love it. Um, so my plan is to talk about that combination of excitement and uneasiness, and some some big questions around how we shape AI use in OER, and a little bit of controversy. And then I've got a couple of polls and opportunities for discussion. Um, and then the sort of the second half is really about disclosure and how we might do that differently, how we might do that, how we might expand how we think about disclosure of AI use in OER. Um, and plenty of time for Q&A, I hope. So I'm going to put the slides link in the chat, um, and you can get in and comment in there if you want. Um, so yes, AI helps us build OER, and that's exciting. I've been kind of electrified by the possibilities since 2022 before ChatGPT was released, and I've been working with AI, and I've also been uneasy with big questions at the same time. So I was just noticing in the conference program that it's the theme. More than half of the sessions are foregrounding uses of AI in OER and ZTC, including both keynotes. And I'm excited to learn from all the folks who are presenting on this, including Joel Glad, Michelle Pilati, Delmar Larson are bringing their own perspectives on how they're shaping this. Norma Jones, folks I haven't met yet, but I'm excited to learn from. And I'm not going to read all the names because I might mangle them, but I'm excited to learn from you on what you're doing. Um, we've seen the broader open education community exploring AI since, one little sign was 2023 from the journal Open Praxis, Aras Bozkurt, saying that it's really transformative to OER. AI can be harnessed to create more diverse, expansive, and inclusive open educational resources, transforming not just how the content is created, but also how it's used and shared. Um, and I think just to kind of ground us, Lance Eaton at Northwestern University has shared this framework for using AI with OER that kind of gives some highlights of different uses. We might be using it to curate open educational materials, to contextualize them for our specific students and context, to co-create with AI, to quality check and fact check and organize materials, um, to publish, and to keep materials current and improve them. Um, and I've been, like many of you, I've been doing this. I started out with a few AI generated template phrases to add to the ones I had written in my argument textbook in 2023. I worked a lot with AI feedback because I invite students to do that. And so I was getting AI feedback on drafts of my AI orientation textbook. Um, supported by the ZTC program of the California Community College's Chancellor's Office. And then in our Peer and AI Review Plus Reflection project, founded at UC Davis, where I'm a collaborator, we have used AI for input into the educator-shaped AI feedback prompt that we've been working on, and the little bits of the text were suggested by um, Claude and ChatGPT. Um, I've built PlayLab chatbots drawing on my OER textbook. I'm using those with students for select assignments. I'm using AI pretty constantly for research assistance, accessibility fixes, and my world right now is okay. What do I do? How do I work best with Claude Cowork for agentic AI workflows, for administrative tasks, for changing formats of documents? And I'm looking forward to Joel Glad's keynote on agentic AI tomorrow because I think he's at the frontier of that use exploration. But I also feel uneasy, overwhelmed sometimes, and sort of daunted by the amount of wisdom I think it probably takes to make these decisions about how much AI to use and where. Um, and I like the piece that Lance Eaton again did about AI and OER sort of, has a sober note where it says this is not simply a matter of adding a new tool. It raises questions about authorship, control, instructional intent, and pedagogical value. And it requires educators to define the scope of Gen AI, determine where it meaningfully supports learners, and assess where a human-centric approach should be prioritized. A lot of wisdom needed there. Um, and I think that the temptations, the concern, the questions, the uneasiness are only increasing as AI improves. Um, there are these questions of how much of this should we turn over to it? Can it do things better than we can? Um, I don't find that easy to dismiss, and in some ways it's exciting. And I've really been following what David Wiley, sort of a godfather of OER, um, has explored. He has sort of made the case that, if our main goal in OER is access, if one of our main goals, then we have to admit that generative AI maybe facilitates greater access in many ways. It can create he says it can create new resources on demand. It can provide access to dramatically more resources on more topics in more languages, more examples, more pedagogies, more formats. And he calls the traditional OER production process of doing it by hand a bespoke process, sort of implying that it's sort of precious and antiquated. Um, and he's been blogging about this. He's a person I respect very much, and I'm very interested in what he's up to. Um, and I'm just exploring his projects. I don't know if you've checked out generativetextbooks.org, which is something that he built. It's essentially a space where you can log in with a Google account and you can upload open educational materials and use them as a basis for creating sort of guided pathways of learning for students. But essentially, it's a prompt library. It's a prompt management system. So educators are writing prompts, and students are then engaging with AI with those prompts in the background, directing it. But they're not engaging directly with what educators have written or said, except maybe if those prompts pull out quotes from a textbook, right? Um, and, he's very committed to having it be free and open source. Um, he's interested in open source AI powering this and having local AI power it. That's all very compelling and interesting. Um, but I'm not ready for it. I've explored that platform, built a little something here and there, and thought, not just that I'm not ready, it doesn't feel like what I want to offer my students at this moment. Um, I have realized that in my mind, what we're doing, what drew me to OER is the idea that we're offering something out of a desire to communicate, to share, to help, that there's a connection with students, even through a textbook, right? Which is the least sexy, the least sort of, warm and friendly connotation word. But I do think of the textbooks that I've worked on as sort of letters to students. That's what kept me going. That's what gets me excited about doing them. Um, they're based on my teaching experience, my collaborators' teaching experience, what we've studied, what we can learn from other academic sources in our discipline. And we're sort of saying to students, I'm saying to them through the words of my textbook, here's what I find valuable. What do you make of it? Right. And then ultimately, I'm asking my students to respond through discussions, through social annotation, to speak back. So there's a human conversation, and there's a message of care in that, right? And so if the students are only engaging with a chatbot, even under my direction of the direction of my prompt, they're not in that moment. They're not getting that message of care. Um, And I'm thinking partly here of the movement toward humanizing online learning in the California community colleges, of Michelle Pacansky-Brock's work, which has been so transformative. And the core of that is the idea that, you support student motivation by humanizing, that in humanized courses, instructor-student relationships are the connective tissue between the students, the engagement, and the rigor. Um, Welcome to folks who are just joining. I'll put the slides back in the chat, and thanks for introducing yourselves. Very cool. You can. Um, so I'm going to get a little bit alarmist here and talk about worst case scenarios, about how students might feel if we go too much toward AI created instructional materials. I think there's a real risk that they can feel neglected or cheated. I've been hearing this from my 15-year-old son, who is an artist and very much opposed to AI. We have a lot of big discussions, very tense discussions sometimes. Um, but, he really felt alienated when he had the impression that his language arts teacher was creating worksheets and assignments with AI and not disclosing it. Um, and I think we've seen some backlash um, in the media. This is a Guardian article from 2025. Staffordshire students in the UK were really alienated, sort of saying, well, we could have asked ChatGPT. There's a sense that if you're going to give me AI, I can go get that. What I want is something from you humans who are my educators. Um, and another example, sort of Kashmir Hill did a piece on this in the New York Times, looking at Rate My Professors complaints, finding a lot of them about instructors over relying on AI. I understand this is not the same as an OER context. This is about maybe individual instructors who are not necessarily using open licenses, but some students were feeling that this was hypocritical, and that it was alien. It was a sign of professors checking out. Um, and I went looking for student attitudes to AI instructional materials, and I did find this sort of European Digital Council report based on a global survey in 2024 that showed some signs of concern from students. That 55% of students um, believe that over-reliance on AI in teaching decreases the value they receive. Um, and that 54% do not find courses primarily created and delivered by AI more valuable than traditional courses. I mean, that's not, strident condemnation because, they might still find them as valuable. Um, but there's some pushback. There's some sense of skepticism there from students. Um, and so, when we offer them these materials, how do they feel about it? How does that affect their engagement? How does that land with them when they can't choose, right? We're not saying, this textbook can be AI or not AI, right? Or this OER assignment can be AI or not. We're deciding if it is or not, and students do have some rights here. I found that there's an organization for students in higher ed, the National Student Legal Defense Network, that has just put out a student AI Bill of Rights. And it very explicitly says that students have a right, that educational design should be directed by a qualified human instructor. Now, you could say that a human directing AI would qualify as that criteria. Um, and I think the language is a little ambiguous, but clearly there's a concern about overuse of AI and the vetting and the checking and the guidance, the direction, the leadership. Um, and they go on to say students have the right to know that the education they are paying for is being designed and provided by individuals with sufficient knowledge and experience and with an educational background appropriate for the course being taught. Um, and so those are all references to human institutions, human experience, um, human educational contexts, things that AI cannot, it can simulate, but it cannot actually have that educational background. It cannot be part of a community of discourse of scholars. Um, So, just to be a little provocative, in the worst case scenario, put in the harshest way, and I don't think this is what, David Wiley or others are advocating at all. But I think it's a risk worth naming. Um, so we could be thrusting unwanted AI slop onto students who don't want to learn from AI. That's not what they're seeking. Um, And when I use that term AI slop, I went to see sort of who has put that term out there and what they mean, because it's thrown around so much in sort of social media culture, often to refer to images, videos, soap operas with fruit that are AI generated, right? Um, and I came to this guy, Simon Willison, who is a big sort of influential AI blogger, technologist, someone who has shaped how people think about prompting strategies. So he is all in on AI in every way. Um, but he made this provocative statement that um, he's increasingly of the opinion that sharing unreviewed content that has been artificially generated with other people is rude. Now, of course, we wouldn't do that, right? We're committed to reviewing any AI content that we put out there. But he also emphasizes the idea that, that there might, if there's not consent from the person on the other end of it, that's an origin of some maybe rudeness. And he says not all promotional content is spam and not all AI generated content is slop. But if it's mindlessly generated and thrust upon someone who didn't ask for it, slop is the perfect term for it. And yeah, I mean, if we're directing thoughtfully the AI production, I don't think that's at all mindless. Um, but I do recognize in my own practice with AI that, as it's increasingly sophisticated, um, it's it's always a challenge to force myself to do due diligence. There's an impulse to like, oh, that was more sophisticated than I'm used to seeing, and it looks good and it seems good and I think it's good. And maybe it's only on the second or the third time that I come back to that and I scrutinize it that I realize that something in there is a little empty, or it doesn't quite make sense, or it doesn't say as much as I want it to. Um, or it's not the best way to conceptualize the point. So I think there's always that slippery slope, that risk, that temptation, not especially since we use AI for efficiency, right? It allows us to do things that we wouldn't otherwise have time to do. So there's always that tension, that pressure of, um, I'm using this to save time, and it's really quite so amazingly good, but I know it's not 100%. So how do I stay in control? How do I stay um, intellectually the one in charge? And how do I hold myself accountable? Um, so both of those things, the difficulty of properly and sort of deeply vetting it and shaping it and editing it, and this question of student consent. If students don't want AI materials, how is that affecting their motivation, their trust, their attitudes in the learning space? Um, so I do think we can continue to foreground human educators' guidance at the heart of OER, and the idea of pursuing knowledge as um, a collaborative human endeavor through OER, even as we work with AI. Um, Let me check before I go into this next section. Let me just check the chat. Have folks been feel free to put questions or comments in as we go, share resources with each other, um, you know, rate, put in a flag if something doesn't make sense or you fully disagree. I love a lively chat. So, and as people are joining, welcome, and I'll put the slides link back in. Um, so I did want to come back to what made me drawn to OER in the beginning. There was this sense of empowerment um, that OER was sort of the best of academia. It was, a more democratic manifestation of academia. It was a way that more people could participate in um, shaping knowledge and and in sharing it and in teaching others um, and I think this is echoed in the UNESCO statement from 2019, um, where they had this recommendation on open educational resources, saying that OER can engage both educators and learners to become more active participants in educational processes. So that's referring to open pedagogy and involving students in the creation of open educational resources as well. Um, and creators of content as members of diverse and inclusive knowledge societies. Um, so that's again about human interaction, human connection, webs of human collaboration. And, we could say that's what we want learning spaces to be, an initiation into that kind of collaborative human practice, right? That's what academia is at its best. And that textbooks are an invitation into that. They're supposed to be expert summaries of disciplinary knowledge built on human collaboration, conversation, mutual accountability, um, and so that's kind of, the positive vision of a textbook, that it's not enforcing power on students, but it's inviting them into communities of discourse. Um, and I think there was a point in the chat that I missed from Daniel, who asked, do you feel that professors are more apprehensive about using AI to write OER texts now more than ever before? Um, I don't know, actually. I think maybe Michelle or Delmar would have more of a sense of that. I think that I think everybody's more uneasy about AI than ever before, even as we're using it more. So in that sense, maybe yes, I would imagine that I'm not alone in that sense of ambivalence and uneasiness. And also, I think that the backlash has grown from students. We've seen the booing of AI speakers at college graduations. And I've, certainly anecdotally heard professors saying that they have more student pushback against AI literacy activities from a certain cohort of students, not a majority. But yeah, I think the increasing use of AI detection software like Pangram has made people nervous about work being flagged as AI, rightly or wrongly. Um, but I also see Ronald Lethco in the chat saying that the professors he works with are more comfortable using AI to create OER than before. And I think those things can probably coexist. Um, and oh, good. Okay, pushback from Delmar. Larson, who's asked, saying, Wiley has argued that Gen AI is a culmination of remixing of existing OER. I have been reluctant to accept that since most LLM training is from sources that were not openly licensed or approved, um, possibly equaling theft. And it's worthwhile to consider the ethics of using Gen AI. Yes, absolutely. And I haven't really addressed that in this keynote, but that is something that we're focusing on this summer in the grant project I mentioned, the Peer and AI Review plus Reflection project. We are sort of wrestling with the question of why, how can we explain to students why we're even using AI given all of the ethical concerns around environmental impacts, labor, intellectual property, and datafication, privacy, and more. Um, and I think in my AI orientation textbook, I tried to kind of write a pretty open letter as to my mixed feelings about this, include sections educating people on the ethical concerns and sort of share, my possibly flawed approach, which is that I'm thinking that it makes sense to try to shape and limit AI and maybe reshape where it's gone wrong rather than refusing it. Um, and that's been my stance. But thank you for calling me on that because I probably should have addressed it in every presentation. Um, and I think we can be open with students about that as well. Um, a culmination, I mean, I think the hope that Wiley has is that if you upload files of OER, if you direct the AI system enough, you can get it to focus on using those sources that are OER to produce its results. And that's imperfect because, as we know, AI systems are black box algorithms that are trained on this broad range of sources, and they can't tell us exactly what influenced any given output, even if we've given them files and told them to base it on a textbook. It's going to be influenced by other things. And even if it's using the textbook, it will summarize the textbook wrong sometimes, right? Or not in alignment with the author's intention. Um, and so I agree with you that I don't think that it's just a culmination of remixing of existing OER. I don't know if Wiley would qualify that. I don't know. I should look at his argument again. And Yeah, I love the comments in the chat that LibreText has some new features to create alt text overviews and conclusions, which has helped a lot, but the rest of the text is written by the authors, the human authors. Um, and Michelle is saying faculty should be apprehensive or at least actively thoughtful about using AI for straight up creation, but as a thought partner makes sense. Yes, and it's very appealing to use it as a thought partner. I try to do that all the time. Um, and I think it's a complicated gray area sometimes as to what that means, right? And where the line, where we draw that line. Um, so I think we've seen since early on, again, Eras Boskurt in 2023, writing that it's not a matter of replacing human authors or educators, but rather of enhancing their capabilities. So that's been the hope. Um, and I think the California Community College's Chancellor's Office put out this humans framework for AI use in education that emphasizes supporting rather than replacing human judgment and relationships in education. Um, so I have kind of similar lines in the sand to what Michelle and Delmar were both sort of commenting on and others were commenting on. Um, with my OER textbooks, I'm not using AI even for initial brainstorming or giving me an outline that I use. Um, I will sometimes bounce ideas off of it, but then I'm not using its words, and I'm sort of reshaping what it's giving me or doing it again fresh, stimulated by what I've seen from it. I want to be able to tell students that these are my ideas and my words. Um, but I've run into these gray areas that I mentioned. So if I'm asking it to ask me questions to help me develop my ideas, then the questions it asks me shape what I come up with, right? Um, and sometimes I think I'm just asking it to give me a different format. Like I've described my ideas very fully in this OER chapter. I'd like you to give me a slide deck representing that chapter. And I find that even in that slide deck, it's shifting, it's making choices about the focus, what to emphasize, how to summarize. And I don't necessarily agree with those. And those are strategic choices that I actually want to come out of my vision that I'm sharing with students in the moment in the classroom as I talk through those slides. So I've had to back up sometimes and say, oh no, I have to build these myself, even though I already did the chapter and it's the same ideas. So, um, and I'm seeing some questions in the chat. So let me peek at those, and then we're going to go to a poll. Um, Kaylin Nagel is saying on a labor front, I worry about us moving into a period where educators will face downward pressure to use these technologies or to have more students, courses, labor added with the reason that they improve productivity. Um, Especially as systems sign large and expensive contracts with AI providers and need to get use from them to justify that. Um, when we compare this to past productivity improving technologies, we see those laborers, white collar and blue, squeezed rather than benefiting long term. Absolutely. Thank you for drawing attention to that economic and structural context that's pushing us toward this. So tricky because we don't have a lot of funding in OER. It's sort of compounded the situation that all instructors are in with pressure to teach more students ever more efficiently, is compounded in OER because we're trying to do more with less and offer it for free. And we don't have a big budget for graphic design or, things that commercial publishers might have. Um, and so that temptation, that pressure can be even more. And I think we have to stay aware of that and push back and say, this should not be used to increase the demands on us, right? What else can we do, right? But try to push back against that. Um, and I'm saying that there's a question about copyright and Creative Commons license, and absolutely, I have the same take, Rachel, and I put a couple slides about this at the very end of the slide deck. So if it's AI generated, that chunk of text cannot be copyrighted with a Creative Commons license. Um, it's right. That has been the judgment of the U.S. Copyright Office. Um, but what people have done, and maybe I should show this before we move on, um, is what Creative Commons has said is that you can license your contribution to the result. So you can put an open license on your prompt, on the changes that you made, on whatever you contributed to that partially AI generated output. And they have a sort of sample licensing statement where they say this image was generated in part by the DALL-E platform, and that Creative Commons dedicates any rights it holds to this image to the public domain via CC0. So you can sort of, if you have a hybrid piece, you can make that explicit. Okay. So I want to go back to where we were and to the poll so we can see where people are on this. Um, and I'm going to put the poll link in the chat. Um, so if you would go to the poll and just share a little something about how you use or hope to use or don't use or choose not to use AI in OER. Um, and then you can go on to the next question, which is where do you feel uneasy? Where are the gray areas or tough decisions for you? Um, and yeah, I see the discussion in the chat about how many words need to be changed for a work to be copyrighted, which part was done by DALL-E, and it has to be decided on a case-by-case basis. Yes. So if you would go to that poll, I will start to show it even as things come in. That's not the scientific way to do it, but I think we might be stimulated by each other's comments. And I hope that since it's anonymous, we can, be frank and really share about those uneasiness areas. And maybe there are things we don't feel conflicted at all about. And it's great to know that. But also, you know, where are those big questions? Um, yeah, somebody is saying checking accessibility, ancillary materials. That's an area where I've also experimented with having it create discussion questions that I then edit. I use it to brainstorm. Interesting. I use it to revise content, to create HTML for Canvas. Yes, I've heard that. Generating accessibility code. Someone else saying I use it sparingly just to clean up grammar or spelling or condense content while maintaining my voice and original content. I would never copy or paste direct AI output. Okay. For ideas and inspiration. Occasionally, I've used it to create a worksheet or outline for an assignment. Yes, I've been experimenting with that and disclosing to my students, and I have certain students who just groan when I tell them that I used AI to help me make a worksheet. But then I'm like, well, I couldn't have made this worksheet otherwise. And they're like, "Ah, okay, yeah, yeah." So yeah, conflicted. someone saying they use Notebook LM to create a podcast of the OER text as an option for students to listen to in addition to reading the text. So that's another approach, is to have it be complementary but not replacing the human created resource. Um, it's a questionable resource. AI is a questionable resource. We use it but carefully. Um, I use AI to improve the fluidity of the text. As an ESL, this is important to me. I don't want to use as a substitute of my creativity. Yeah, so there's maybe a case for its broadening access to creating educational materials for folks who might not feel like they're ready to polish it to the level that they want without the AI assistance. Um, I choose not to use AI. Um, because of issues with what they LLMs train on, environmental racism, data center construction. Um, Someone saying, I have not, but I'm here to learn. What is the newest trend in that area? Um, Helping creating visuals such as infographics. Okay, so I'm using AI, oh, sorry, to identify elements that need updating in the OER. Yeah, I've just recently started asking it to annotate a whole slide deck as to like what to focus on, what maybe to update, what to consider, um, to explore topics I may not have adequately considered. So there's kind of the slightly antagonistic thought partner use, right? Um, and someone's mentioning I don't know how you say the acronym, the idea friendly content. I know that's around anti-racism, right? Um, or correct me, somebody. Um, Another question, which AI system can educators get for free while other people have to pay for it? Yeah, that is a big question. Um, I think at different times, Perplexity and Google have offered sort of deals to educators or some months free. Um, and then our system, our institutional systems have been making partnerships that may give us access. If you have a Microsoft or a Google license, you may have access through that to Copilot or Gemini. Um, but it does get tricky because often that's not the most sophisticated system. Um, so that's kind of another good discussion, the question of educator access and paying for this. Um, So this is a great resource. I'm going to put this all in the slides so we have all of these ideas together. Um, and I'm going to just check what people said about the uneasiness. I hate the idea of loss of human creative empathy and genuine curiosity. It's all uneasy, but I think ignoring it isn't the correct move if we want it to be more ethical. Um, I can draft or adapt OER fast, but there's no publisher review layer catching errors. How much human vetting is enough? I feel that too. That's already, a concern in OER. How do we invest and make the case for investing in the peer review process and in fact checking and updating? Um, and there's even more need for that and more pressure on it, given the speed of AI creation if we're using AI for that. Um, okay. Oh, that's um, so you could actually go on. I want to go on to the next section, which is basically I want to talk about how disclosure can help and how what people have been doing and what more we can do to foreground human intent. So even as we're sort of navigating these terrain of deciding when to use it, when not, and I've sort of shared my current practice, which is I want the ideas and words to be mine, except maybe for some ancillary materials like discussion questions, problem sets. But I also think that there's so much that we can do that's that we haven't yet done to communicate with students about these choices. Um, so if you would go to the next slide in the Mentimeter, and some of you have already been filling this out. I was struck that Alan Levine, who is a major leader in open education global, who runs the OE Global Awards, he put up a blog post about transparency about AI use in the nominations. And he just started by saying, in each passing day of reading online content, an ongoing question in the back of my mind is, was this written with generative AI? Right? Cog Dog, yes. Oh, great. And Mark Corbett Wilson is here. Awesome. Um, so how do you feel when you, how does this feel, right? I mean, we kind of know, but I thought it would be neat to see a word cloud. It might feel a lot of different ways, actually, in different moments. Um, let's see what people say. So I feel sad, fine, infuriating and cheated, queasy. It's frustrating. Oh, disappointed is the biggest. I do not police this. That's interesting. What is the feeling that goes with that? I wonder. Um, Icky. Okay, so I did kind of set this up for the negative feelings, but disturbed, right? Uncanny valley. Somebody put aim. Oh, aim Maloney. Wonderful. Um, so I mean, clearly there is potential for things that we don't want our students to experience if they're sitting there and wondering. Um, and the idea of having transparency, of relieving the student or the reader of that anxiety of not knowing is not controversial, right? Pretty much everywhere you look, anyone you ask will say, yes, transparency, be transparent, right? That's in almost all the policies. The parent organization for OER Commons, and I think Sheena Campbell is putting out also a link to this in the chat, putting out guidance for responsible AI use that calls for transparency, flag if it was made with generative AI. Um, but I think we should also really watch this because, there is some research showing that even though we might speak to transparency, we might try to practice it, that students are even more concerned than instructors with it. Um, and so I'm looking at this one study from Frontiers in Communication that just found in surveys that instructors somewhat agreed they should tell students about their use of Gen AI tools, but students felt definitively that transparency was important. Um, and I think nothing undermines credibility, of course, like not disclosing it and being exposed. Um, and that's something we're seeing more of recently, with the rise of Pangram, a supposedly more accurate AI detection system that has put out a browser extension you can use anywhere on the internet to estimate the likelihood that text is AI generated. Of course, those detectors are unreliable. Sometimes it does flag human written text as AI. And so there's been a backlash, concern about witch hunts, and Substack recently partnered with Pangram to, make this a feature that anything you're reading on Substack, you can check if it's supposedly AI generated according to Pangram. Um, and so I think I want to, yeah. Um, But again, we return to our core values of OER, and I found this great discussion on the Open Education Global discussion board about core values and how we can stay grounded in as AI is poised to transform teaching and learning. And Dan McGuire said, "We stay grounded by diligent attribution." And I think that points to the another heart of OER, which is not just access, but the idea of attribution, of giving credit is desired, as the author requests it, um, and that grounds us, and we can apply that to AI. Um, but that actually gets challenging with AI because of how it's been built, because it is a black box algorithm. Um, how do you attribute if you're using AI content or you're influenced by AI in some way as a thought partner and it doesn't know what influenced it? Um, or it's not saying, right? It's not, you can't trust it to cite its sources and to do diligent attribution. You can try to tell it to, but this is something that Mahabali, Open Educational Practices leader, has pointed out starting in 2023. She was documenting cases where, she would she asked a chatbot to explain what this phrase white supremacy culture means. And it was essentially plagiarizing Tema Okun, I think, without citing that author. And so we wrote this piece arguing that it's left to us to do due diligence on any AI output and see if it has a hidden source, if it really is plagiarizing or should be citing a person or group of persons who came up with the ideas. And that will be an imperfect process. But that is sort of on us, and maybe it shouldn't just be on us. Um, and that's something that, I also found a great bit about that in the Affordable Learning Georgia's guidelines, saying that we have an ethical obligation to use AI without knowingly replicating single copyrighted or trademarked works, that sometimes it will plagiarize, and we have to look for that. We have to do due diligence. So, um, ways to disclose quickly. Um, Even simple and free form ways maybe can be a way to invite more people in. And that's what Alan Levine did in his approach to inviting nominations for Open Education Global. He made it optional in 2025, but 92% of people did answer the question about Gen AI use, either to say yes or no, I used it, I didn't use it. Um, and then And he really left it open-ended how you disclose, what you tell. Substack has done something similar. Recently, they have a little how I make this field that you can fill out so that if somebody does AI detection on you, they can click on your how I make this statement to see what you say about it. Um, I, have looked to things like MLA and APA citation, but extended them with simple statements about what comes from AI and what doesn't, and added a chat transcript link. That's not always possible. Not all chatbots, not all systems will create transcripts now. I don't think you can get a transcript for Claude Cowork, but it's a nice gesture, right? I think that is a human gesture of you can look at my conversation. I'll expose my own process that students appreciate. Um, this is my favorite find as I prepared for this talk, the me and my machine icons. This was a system created at the Fontys University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands, where it's a system of labels that it's very simple, right? So you have, okay, is it human sweat or is it Gen AI? And what is the proportion? Um, and they have these icons, which might be like this one is 3/4 human sweat, 1/4 AI, right? And that's, I think, what I would label this slide deck as. Um, and you can take those icons and you can link to their site, which describes, they have a classification for, it's in Dutch, but you can It did translate it. Yeah. Classification, lazy hitchhiker, um, cyborg, handyman. They have their own little system here, which I think it's visually appealing and simple, intuitive. You can get a lot more detailed. So this is an AI attribution toolkit developed at IBM. Um, it's informative. It asks you, you can fill out a form to generate your classification, and it's a lot in my mind. So was it reviewed though, is a simple question that you would answer in your label. Who initiated the work? I'm not sure how that is defined exactly. Um, and I think most popular is this artificial intelligence disclosure framework created by Kari Weaver, who's a librarian at the University of Waterloo. And it has all these categories really designed for research that you might use AI for. And so you can fill out a form and say, here, I used AI for this in this way, and then it will create a statement. So I did this for this slide deck um, and acknowledged that how I used Claude Fable 5 to edit a transcript of a verbal brainstorm. I asked it to interview me about the transcript and develop a thematic map, but I did not use text from that map, but I did reflect on it to brainstorm further. And then I used it for information collection, for research assistance, to find sources related to disclosure norms and student attitudes to AI. Um, I asked it to make a to-do list based on my talk description and my slides. So it's a pretty limited use for this particular presentation. But I tried out her. It did get me to reflect further on my own process. Amanda Gray, for the Kansas Pressbooks, KU Pressbooks instance, has created this template for disclosure, which combines the AI disclosure framework with the me and my machine icons, which is kind of nice, so that you would decide which icon fits for each aspect of your work on, um, which gets a bit complicated. Um, so it's always that balance of how much information do you want to share to show your goodwill and your presence, that you're closely paying attention and you're disclosing and you're accountable, versus how much does that overwhelm the reader and how can you keep it simple? I think the paradox is that disclosing AI use can reduce trust in the short term, right? And make people evaluate what you're giving them as less worthy, right? And so various studies have shown that, creating this transparency dilemma. Um, and this sort of key paper on that dilemma. It's interesting because it approached it through saying, well, we should address this by educating people on why they should trust AI. But that doesn't work so well. And in their conclusion, they said, and maybe that's because you shouldn't trust AI, right? Um, but that maybe more communication about the AI usage and alignment with professional standards can mitigate the negative impact on trust. So sharing more about why and how we're using it may be the only way to counter that. Because, you have to have transparency for trust, but also whenever you do it, you're slightly undermining trust in that moment. So we kind of have to live with that paradox. Um, and, one hopeful note was this study from Saudi Arabia that found that, just very simply, if a teacher had said, I endorse this AI educational material, then students did trust it more. So, you know, every bit of that human role, those messages we're sending does have an effect. The teacher, as the researcher put it, is not a transitional figure whose role will diminish as AI improves, but a structurally necessary intermediary whose credibility and explicit validation appear to be essential. So, my background is in writing personal essays, creative nonfiction. I have an MFA in nonfiction. And my instinct is what if we bring a little bit more of the personal essay to the disclosure, a little bit more presence in whatever way we can, sharing if we're using AI and if we're making these tough decisions and encountering these gray areas, sharing more about our process, our intentions, how we're vetting it, our reasons for using it, how we hope this contributes to learning. Um, Maybe even more signs of accountability, like my photo, my signature, um, could help to steer us and help to build trust. So I'm just experimenting with this. Um, what if I have a colleague who asked students to sign a declaration that they didn't use AI? Maybe I should put my signature on here. I didn't do that yet on the slide deck. But at least a picture alongside that icon. Um, so, maybe I should be disclosing more about my process. How, if I say I spent 10 to 15 hours working on this presentation, um, my purpose is to clarify my thinking, learn myself, and share with you. And I did use AI lightly for feedback and help identifying relevant sources. So that was my kind of personal statement that tried to keep it simple, um, and emphasize intention. So I'm curious how that lands with folks. I'm curious how you disclose, what ideas you have. If you're willing to go to that next slide in the Mentimeter, and share, that would be awesome. I'm going to put that in the chat again. And thank you for all the comments. I haven't kept up with the chat. Um, Yeah, I mean, I think Mark points out that, one of my studies was about the idea of AI courses, but, maybe that's exaggerated. Um, so let me see. Let me switch to the poll and see what folks are saying. Um, thank you so much. I'm glad that it was thought-provoking for some. Um, I'm going to go to the Mentimeter. Um, and someone's saying it depends on the situation. I know a very good friend who says, she doesn't always disclose if it's her ideas, but she's used AI to shape the feedback from a verbal brainstorm. She doesn't want to disclose that she used AI because she thinks it'll undermine students' sense of this as her voice. And I understand that. Um, I'm uneasy about it. Um, People are saying they write short blurbs, but don't disclose AI used to create websites, apps, or other tools. That's interesting. So maybe for code, for building something technical, that doesn't seem as personal and it doesn't seem necessary. And then just very plainly, I mean, to say I don't use AI and I don't want my students to replace their own thinking, words, or ideas with it either. Um, Honestly, I put something in my syllabus that's very similar to that. That's just, you know, I will tell you if I'm using AI and I will not use it for emails or feedback to you. Let's see. So thank you for sharing those. I know we're coming up at to the end of the hour, so I want to make sure that we have more open Q&A. And just kind of a last point that I didn't get to is how do we involve students in shaping how AI is used in OER and in shaping disclosure norms? And there's a report for is it the Doors community? I don't know how you pronounce that, but it's an open educational resources consortium. Um, in the idea that we should be working with students to evaluate strengths and risks. of AI use in OER. And that's an open question for me. Beyond these academic studies that poll students' attitudes, how can we work with students um, to shape our practices? So I would love to hear further, yeah, questions, comments, things I missed in the chat. Doers. Okay, thank you, Michelle. I wasn't sure how to pronounce that. Um, oh, people are sharing resources. Thank you. Canvas Commons course on AI from Ronald Lethko. Awesome. Um, yes. A question about companies buying books off the shelf, ingesting them for AI purposes, and then destroying them. I just saw that too and was horrified. I think that's, especially if it's something that's very rare and they're destroying, the last three copies of this rare book in order to use it for training data. That's very disturbing. I mean, I think we're in this position in OER where we kind of know that it's going to be used for training data unless we get a more robust system of allowing author that Creative Commons is sort of working on with their CC Signals project, where we could indicate if we want to allow our text to be used for training data. That's not in place. So, our work is used for training data. And but I'm glad you brought that up because definitely the question of holding companies accountable for intellectual copyright law violations is something we should be interested in. Um, yeah, thank you, Delmar. Yeah, I think that what Creative Commons has done with CC signals is not something that would be legally binding um, or enforceable. But it would be a way for authors to indicate their preference, at least, and then companies can hopefully respect that. Um, Thank you so much for the really kind comments. I got feedback from Fable, and then I got feedback from Gemini. And Gemini last night, when I asked it to proofread, was telling me that I needed to be more formal in my my slides in my language. I was like, I'm sorry, that's not me. I just want to get right to it. So thank you for bearing with me with that. Yeah, maybe it's a joke that we hope that companies respect these voluntary guidelines, but um, I think the recording is going to be up in the Zoom for the whole. Michelle wants to
Yeah,
speak.
well, yeah, when everything's available, we'll make sure that you guys know about it. Anna, this was phenomenal, and I've never seen such an active chat during a pr presentation, and for you to sit there and actually try to keep track of it is
Oh,
laudable.
I can't resist. I want to know what people are saying. Such a great group, I know, and I'm excited for all the other presentations on this topic. So we'll be in conversation with each other on these, and that's what gives me solace and hope, right? Is the earnestness and the goodwill and the excitement and enthusiasm in the OER community will sustain us, right? Through the uneasiness, right? And help us navigate. So I look forward to that with all of you and hope to see you on social media for those discussions too. Um, yeah.
Thanks so much, Anna. And thanks to everyone for joining us.